Hello my dear friends, Patrick here, and there's still one tutorial left to cover all CRUD operations with Blazor. We've got static server-side rendering already. We've also got Blazor server, but what about Blazor WebAssembly now, right? We need a separate additional project to be able to utilize WebAssembly with the new Blazor in .NET 8, and this is what we're going to do today. So all CRUD operations with Blazor WebAssembly using the Blazor web app template in .NET 8. Well, some things have changed, right? And in this tutorial now, you will learn how this works. And if you really learned something and like this tutorial, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button, and there's also a button next to the like button, and it would be amazing if you could click this button. It does help my channel to grow and to create more videos like this one. So please guys, subscribe to my channel. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for doing that. And also thank you so much to all my patrons. I love every single one of you. If you want to support me too, links in the video description. And now let's start with the tutorial. All right, so we are here, Visual Studio 2022. We create a new project with the new Blazor web app template. This is important, not the Blazor WebAssembly standalone app. I did this in another tutorial. Here it's all about the render modes, and for that we need the Blazor web app template. So we hit next, and now let's call this Blazor WebAssembly .NET 8 CRUD or CRUD.NET 8, because this is, I think, the same structure I used for the other projects. All right, we hit next, and now the framework, of course, .NET 8, no authentication, HTTPS is great. And now regarding the interactive render mode, we already see WebAssembly here, and this is what we want to choose. We could, of course, also choose auto, because with that we have the same boilerplate code, the same configuration that we also need for WebAssembly. But since we only want to use WebAssembly here, let's just choose that. The main difference is that when we choose auto, then you will see within the example pages, to be more precise, within the counter page, we will see the interactive render mode auto on the counter page. And here now with WebAssembly, it's just WebAssembly. So no combination of server, meaning WebSockets, and WebAssembly. Anyways, interactivity location should be per page or component. I think this totally makes sense. And then we choose to, yes, include the sample pages. So let's create this thing and then already have a quick look how this... Real quick, I'm currently creating a .NET 8 Web Dev Jumpstart course, which will be available for free. We're going to have a look at web APIs and entity framework there, for instance. And if you want to be the first to know when this thing is available, then I recommend just check out the link in the video description, and I will send you an email when you can get it. So scroll a bit further down and then you know what to do. And now let's continue with the tutorial. There it is, how this looks. So we have our server project here. Structure is a bit different to .NET 7. Maybe you already know that. We have a pages folder and the layout folder now with the main layout nav menu. But in essence, the examples are still the same. We have, instead of the fetch data page, we have the weather page where we, well, fetch some simulated and randomized weather forecast data using stream rendering here. Again, this is something I did already in, or I covered already in another tutorial. We have a home page, error page, and so on. This tutorial is not about these basic things, this basic stuff here. We want to have a look at the basic still WebAssembly CRUD operations. And for that, the client project is interesting, because whenever you want to use WebAssembly for a page or a component, in a sense it's the same, right? Then you have to move that to the client. And as you can see here already, render mode interactive WebAssembly. This is the directive we need, the render mode directive. When you already played around with .NET 8 before the final release, then you know that we had an attribute instead of the render mode directive, but now this attribute is no more. So please pay attention there, and here is the results. And now let's just open the console directly, and when we have a look here and go to counter, we see that WebAssembly files have been downloaded and we can go there. We have interactivity. Awesome. And we also see that here when we go to a network and then WASM, this is all the stuff that has been downloaded, right? Okay, so WebAssembly it is, and now how can we implement CRUD? This is an easy example, right? Because this is just a button. But what about now changing real data, creating new entities, and so on? First thing I want to do here is lots of boilerplate regarding entity framework. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I did this in the other tutorials. Check them out in the info cards or wherever you find them here on the screen. So if you already know how to do that, just check out the time codes and jump to the actual implementations of the CRUD operations. Now I will again implement all the entity framework boilerplate stuff. For that, I first have to close the terminal. And then I will add another project actually, and this will be a class library for the entity. So add a new project, class library it is, and we call this now, when we have a look at the names, it's actually this thing up here is the server project, because this has all or also all the .NET Web API capabilities. So we can, for instance, create a controller here, and we will have to do that anyways. This is then the real client, let's say. And additionally, then I would like to add a shared project. So the name now would be maybe Blazor WebAssembly CRUD.NET 8 and then shared. Amazing name, really. So we don't need that class, but I want to add a folder now called entities, for instance. And in here now, similar to the other examples, we add a video game class. This is the video game entity, and this thing now is public and gets some properties. First one is the ID, since this is an entity and I want to store that in the database table. Then we have a title, which can be nullable. I mean, why not for this simple example? Then also the publisher is something I would like to add. And the last one, nullable int for the release year. Okay, and with that entity now we can create our data context or a database context, and we do that now here on the server part. So we add a new folder, call this data for instance, and then also add a new item which is the data context. So now comes all the entity framework stuff. So here now we inherit from a DB context, not known yet, but with control period, we get the suggestion to install the package Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and this is exactly what we want here. And when this is done, we add a constructor. So CTOR, we hit tab, and we need a parameter here of type DB context options, and in there we put our data context now with options, and here we also call the base constructor. This is nice. And additionally, I know I'm quite fast here, but this is no entity framework course, so bear with me here, please. Additionally, we need a database set to represent the video games then in the database. So another property it is, which is the DB set of the type, or with the type video game. This is now our shared project here, and we call this video games. So usually just pluralize the name of your entity, and this is then the name of the table. Now there's one more thing I would like to add, and this is seeding the data already, and you do that in the onModel creating method. So protected overrides and then onModel creating, and for that let's get some space here. And here now let me really just copy and paste that stuff, because I think this is a bit tedious. So there it is, model builder entity for the video game, we say this has some data, and these are the 3 games that I would like to add with the IDs, titles, publisher, and the release year. Great, so that's that. Now the next step would be the connection string, meaning I would like to use a SQL Server Express database available for free and even for commercial use. So you can get that by simply Googling for SQL Server Express, download it, install it, and then you might want to use the following connection string. So first we add the section connection strings, and in here now we say default connection, and this is then server localhost / SQL Express. Database is video game DB. Trusted connection is true, and also trust server certificate also true. All right, so that's the connection string. And now with the help of that connection string, we can register our data context here in the program CS, but we also have to tell our application to use SQL Server. So for that, we add another NuGet package here, and that would be then the SQL Server provider for Entity Framework. So we can just search for SQL Server, for instance, and there it is already, Microsoft SQL Server database provider for Entity Framework Core. So let's just install that thing and then go back to the program CS. And here now we again register the database context with builder services add db context data contexts. That's the one. This thing gets some options. So here now we say options use SQL Server. This is now available thanks to the SQL Server provider. And this thing wants a connection string, and we get it with builder configuration get connection string and then the name default connection. All right, that's that. And now the next thing is I would like to use code first migrations to create our database. For that, we need another NuGet package, and that would be the Entity Framework Core tools. So here now again, we can just look for tools, for instance, and that's the one, Entity Framework Core tools for the NuGet package manager console. And with that, we get some commands like add a migration and update the database. And this is exactly what we need and what we use exactly next. So here now in the package manager console, when everything is loaded, we just run add dash migration, hit tab for instance, call this initial for our initial migration. Default project is the server project in that case. We hit return and build started, build succeeded. And now we get a new migration file. It's already open here, but you can see it as well here in the server project that the migrations folder was created. We have two methods here, up and down. When we roll back the migration, we see that the down method will be executed in essence, and this just means that it will drop the video games table. But more important for us here is the up method, meaning when we apply this migration, then it will create the video games table with our columns. ID is already the primary key, auto incrementing the identity field, and we also insert some data here. Perfect. So I suggest we run update and then database. And yes, even if the database does not exist, update database is the proper command here because it also creates the database. And here you see all the commands like inserting the example data, creating the table, and so on. Now to have a look at the database, I like to use SQL Server Management Studio. Again, you can just Google for that thing and then have a quick look. There it is already. It's currently loading. We connect And here are our databases. Now, Blazing Blog is from the .NET Web Academy. Enrollment is open in a couple of weeks, but for now, let's focus on the video game database with the video games table. ID, title, publisher, and release year is here, and we see that our data is there as well. Isn't that nice? All right, and with that, we can implement our CRUD operations. The first one is the easiest, I guess, which would be simply getting all the games. And for that, we have to go to the server project here first, because what we need here is a controller. So we just first create a new folder similar again to a web API. So here now this would be the controllers folder, and I would like to add a new controller, which is an API controller, an empty one, and we give this thing the name video games controller. That's it. We have the route API controller, which would then be video games. Of course, we can also enter the name here. So this is now the hard-coded name, video games. API controller is also the attribute we need. It indicates that a type and all derived types are used to serve HTTP API responses. And in here now, we can inject the data context and access our data. But before we are able to use that controller, let's have a quick look at the program CS first, because what you see here is that you don't see the configurations for controllers. What you do see here is the new Blazor stuff, like add interactive WebAssembly components. So this is added when you choose the WebAssembly render mode. In the beginning, when you're creating your project with the new web app template, the Blazor web app template, and same thing here, add interactive WebAssembly render mode, and also add additional assemblies from the counter assembly. One hint here, please note you don't have to add this for every single component. So when we will add a video game related page, we can just leave it like that. Or when you remove the counter eraser page, then please replace this thing by the video game page, for instance. All right, that said, controller. So what we need again is our controllers, and we add them like that. So builder services again, add controller. So that's the one. It adds services for controllers to the specified iService collection. This method will not register services used for views or page. Well, it adds services for controllers. This is everything we need, and the iService collection is, well, this thing here, builder services. So same or similar to registering the database context or any other service that you create here in your application. And that's not it. One more thing is necessary. We also have to map our controllers. So here now we add map controllers. That's the one. And as you can see here, this thing now adds the endpoints for controller actions to the endpoint route builder without specifying any routes. Well, this just means that when we create our controller here and in a sec then add our endpoints, that they are available. All right. Anyways, now first the get method, I would say. First the data context. So in a constructor, or we just start with the data context right away with private read-only data context and control period here, and we can say generate the constructor for this controller. So now this thing is available, and here now HTTP get is correct. This is our first method, public async task, returning a list, first the action result with a list of video games, and we call this thing get all video games async, for instance. And in here now we just return await context video games to a list async. That's it. So this is now our controller method that we need. We can actually already test that. So let's just save everything and run that. All right, there we are. And now let's just enter API video games. And there they are. See that? And here you can see that as well. This is our response. In the preview, it's a bit structured. So here you see these are our seeded games, and this is the direct call to our controller. And now, rest is simple, right? We just have to create a page that is calling this endpoint. Well, let's see. So we go back to Visual Studio and now our client project, and here in the pages folder we just add a new Razor component and call this maybe video game overview. And since I'm lazy today, I just copy something here. So from the weather page, there it is, I am grabbing that stuff. We go back to the video game page here, and now the name of course is video games. Same thing here, video games, don't need that. Now instead of the forecasts, we will have a list of video games. So list video game, we need a reference here, control period not working. Okay, give me a sec. Video games, which is a new list of video games. Do we get a suggestion here? No, we don't. Maybe because of the other errors here, but what we can do is we can have a look at the dependencies. We don't have the project dependency here, so let's just add the shared one. All right, and now we're talking, see? But I don't like that here really. I want to put that in the imports Razor because we also have an imports Razor file in the client project, of course. So that's the one I want. With that, we have the video game class available. Okay. And here now we say video games. Don't check for null. This time I just check for if the count is 0, then we're loading. Otherwise, we've got the following. It's the title of the video game, publisher, and the release year. And maybe let's already keep that column for an edit button, for instance. And here now in the video game, for each of our video games, we simply display that stuff. So video game title it is, and now let's just copy that for the publisher and also the release year. Come on, that's the one, and let me keep that like that for now. So these are our video games, and now how do we get them? Well, again, similar to the weather forecast page. Where is it? There it is. Here we simulate this delay. So maybe, yeah, why not? We can grab, or do we? Yeah, let's just grab that as well. So here now, what we have, very important first, the async task uninitialized async method. All right. With that, we can make a call to the controller on initialization of that component. Real quick, in Blazor you have 3 lifecycle methods: on initialized async, on parameter set, and then also on after render. You can have a look here, override, and then we should see the suggestion. There it is, on initialized. We already have the async one, that's why we don't see it here. We have on parameter set and on after render. First one that will be called is the uninitialized, then the second one on parameter set. We will also use this one when we edit a video game, and the last one then on after render when the component is finished with rendering. Okay, so this just as a side note. But here now, okay, we have this delay, and then we have to make a web service call. If you already know Blazor WebAssembly from before .NET 8, then you might already know that we need the HTTP client. For that, I forgot one thing. We also have to add the page directive here. Let me just call that video games, for instance. And then here we inject with add inject the HTTP client. Call this HTTP, for instance. And now here we can say HTTP, or first bar results is HTTP get from JSON async. We want a list of video games, and now the URL is API video games. All right. Should we test that? Well, let's have a look. Well, maybe first one more thing. In the navigation menu, let's just add another route or another link without an image or icon. Here now, video games. All right, now let's have a look. It is hopefully rebuilding. Let's go. Yeah, there it is. Great. Maybe we can open the console. I have a feeling that this will not work. We go to video games. Ooh, what's that? Cannot provide a value for property HTTP. There is no registered service of type system.net.http.http client. See that? Of course. Because when we go back now to our program CS of the client, this is everything we have. So there is really no HTTP client registered, and the same thing also here, of course, on the server. We did not even have controllers available. So we have to add something here to our program CS file. So let's go there. And to register now the HTTP client, you can actually look it up in your older WebAssembly, Blazor WebAssembly projects, maybe. Builder services, and then add scoped. So we are going to add it as a scoped service. And then new HTTP client, and then in curly braces base address is now new URI, and then builder host environment base address. All right, well, let's test that now. Restart the application. Still this error. Why is this happening? Well, maybe you were already wondering. When I now go back to Visual Studio and now go to my video game overview page, there's no render mode specified, right? So actually what we're currently using is static server-side rendering. This means that this is first going to run on the server, and the result would be then sent to the client, although the page and the component is placed here in the client project. So this is something that might be confusing in the beginning, right? We put this here in the client project because Microsoft told us to put all WebAssembly related stuff in the client project, but you can put your stuff there and still use Blazor SSR or Blazor static server-side rendering. So just keep that in mind. Now let's add render mode, interactive web assembly. All right, now to make this work, we have this available because of the templates we're using, but if, for instance, you decide for some reason to start with Blazor static server-side rendering and then you want to add the render modes later, make sure to also add this reference here, static Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Web Render Modes. And then you will, or this thing here will be available then. Okay, restart this one more time. It's rebuilding. Still this freaking error. What the hell is going on here? Let me try one more thing. Instead of using it that way, by default pre-rendering is enabled. So maybe we can disable pre-rendering, and then let's have a look at the result. So here now what I want to do is a new interactive WebAssembly render mode with pre-render set to false. Restart the application. Something's happening here, but of course I made an error, or I forgot something. Video games is now the result. If result is not null, and of course we have to await this thing. Okay, so now, drum roll please. We have our games. Yay, isn't that nice? So to have a quick look at that again, we have our page here, our Razor component in the client project. This is important, right? We configured the controller also here in the program CS. We had to add some stuff. We implemented the controller. Great. Now we had to also add the HTTP client here to the program CS of the WebAssembly project, the client project. Great. And then in the video game overview Razor component, we added the render mode interactive WebAssembly, but we also had to specify or to configure this thing in a way that pre-rendering is disabled. So we actually had to create a new instance of the interactive WebAssembly render mode, and with that, or that way, we were able to disable pre-rendering. And then, if it's not too late at your side and you don't have two kids and sleep deprivation, then you wouldn't make these, well, interesting mistakes to, await the call and of course set the video games then. So with that now get from JSON async, we see that we get the result. And why did I leave the delay here? Well, let's just check this out one more time. When I switch the page from weather to video games, I just wanted to demonstrate that the application will open the page and it takes 500 milliseconds to load the data and we see the loading text. All right. This is just something I wanted to show you because this is something Microsoft also implemented with static server-side rendering and the stream rendering. All right, so here in the weather page, for instance, you see that the data, you first see the loading text, and then the data comes after 500 milliseconds, and this is only possible thanks to stream rendering. And I know we're talking about WebAssembly here, but real quick, when I would remove that and restart the application, it's not the same. We have to wait for half a second before we really see the page. When you now have a look at the address bar, I click here, the URL will change, and then the data comes after, or the page opens after half a second. So I click now, that changed, right? And then we see the data. Maybe I can do this one more time. See that? So we do not see the loading text, for instance, we just see the data directly, but we have to wait for it. So this is now the magic of stream rendering, and you can, by the way, do a lot already with static server-side rendering. So WebAssembly feels now that this is kind of the last thing that Microsoft wants us to use, right? It really seems that the first way to go is stream rendering. The combination of a static server-side rendering with stream rendering and also enhanced navigation. But after that, when you need real interactivity, because you can already do all the CRUD stuff, and by the way, of course, also did a video about that, you can implement all the CRUD stuff with static server-side rendering. But when you need more interactivity, then Blazor server would be maybe the next solution, or then of course Blazor WebAssembly. This is totally up to you. So long story short, this now works, and the next implementations are pretty straightforward. If you already know Blazor WebAssembly, then you know that of course we have to implement the controller here first, or maybe can implement the controller first, and then we have to add all the other components like using the edit form and so on for the CRUD stuff. But let's just do that together now. So we would have now also a method for a single game. The route now is just the ID, or we add the ID, and here get game by ID async, and ID, we want one single video game, and here we say video games, find async ID var results, and let's say if the result is null, then we return not found. game not found, like that. Otherwise, return OK result. Now deleting a game maybe, because we also need the ID there. So here this would be then HTTP delete game async. We first want to find this thing, and if we have it, we say context remove results, and here now we say await context save changes async. All right, and that would be deleting the game. Now updating is HTTP put as the request method. Here actually don't want to return the result, just return OK and just an iAction results. All right, now here updating the video game, update game async. We can give this thing the ID and also the new updated game. Now the database game is this one here, and then we say db game title, for instance, is updated game title, db game publisher, updated game publisher, and the release year as well, db game updated game release year. And then we just again save the changes and return the new database game maybe. And the last one is creating. So here that would be posts, no route here to add. And we say add game async like that. We call this new game. We don't have to find anything here. We just say context add and then new game, save that, and then again return the game. Alright, so this is the controller, and now on the client let's add another page for editing a game. So edit a game, and there we will also create the game. And if you watch my other videos, you already know what's coming next. First I add the page directive here with edit game, and then another one with edit game, but this time also an ID like that. And this just tells me if we have an ID, this means that we really want to update a game, and if we don't have an ID as parameter, then this means that we want to create a game. So the easiest, that's pretty much the easiest way to check what the user currently wants to do. So if the ID now is null, and yes, of course we have to add the ID here as a property, nullable int ID, and set the parameter attribute, because this thing is a parameter. All right, now if this thing is null, a nullable integer, then we say title is not h3, the title is create game, and otherwise we say h3 edit, and then the title of the game. For that we need another property here. So for instance, prop video game, and this is just a new video game, of course. Okay, something like that. And here now I just say game title. All right, let's leave it at that. And now in our video game overview, I wanted to add a button here. So this is now a button. Let's call this edit, for instance, and we give this thing a class like button primary bootstrap stuff. And when the user clicks on this thing, then we call an edit function. So this would look like that. Since we have to add a parameter edit game, and then a video game ID. So this would then be our edit button. And down here we can add our create button. So our add button, add a new game. And here again, class button primary, and on click add game. All right, so now the methods, of course, void add game and void edit game with an ID. That's that. And the only thing I want to do here is navigating the user to another page. Let's go on here. Of course, no parentheses. All right. And for that, we inject the navigation manager, like that. And here now we say navigation manager, navigate to edit game. All right. Same for the edit game function. So a navigation manager, navigate to, and here now edit game with the given ID. And when we use this method, then real quick here now, told you about that before, in the protected overrides on parameters set async now, what I want to do is get the game. So var result is now also the HTTP client. So add inject HTTP client HTTP, and here I say await HTTP get from JSON async. I want a video game, and the URL is now API video games and then the given ID. And in the end say if result is not null, our game is the result. All right, I'd say let's have a look. Restart the application. And there we are. We go to video games again. We already see the add new game button. So when I go there, I get an error again. Same thing as before. So what we have to do is, of course, add the render mode. So let's just copy this thing with pre-rendering disabled like that, restart it again, and now we see our create game title, but of course with an error, and that's because the onParameter set will be called either way, of course. So we have to check if the ID is not null, like that, and then the function will not be called. We can cast the ID here as well to an integer. So let's try that one more time. And create game is probably not the correct text here, but now we see no error message. Create game is what is opened. Let's remove that as well in a second. When we go to edit, we see Cyberpunk 2077, Elden Ring, and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. So one more thing now. In the overview, I want to remove that. All right, and let's also remove the delay. I think we got the idea now. So here we are already able to get the single game. We call this now add game, and the next step now is the edit form to, well, create an updated game. So what we're going to do is use the built-in edit form here. This thing needs a model, and again, this is our game. All right, and we call a method on submit, and this method is called handle submit. Let's call this here, or I put it here, task handle submit. All right, and now here we have a couple of options actually. For instance, we add a div with then a label after formatting the div, a label for the title, call this also title, and then again a built-in component. What happened here? Built-in component input text with the ID title now, and we bind the value game title and set the class to form control. Alright, so this now is our input text field for the title, same thing for the publisher, and then here this will be an input number for the release year. So here now let's just change that and say publisher. Also here the publisher, great. And now here input number for the release year, like that, release year, and also here the release, almost the release year, like that. Okay, and the last thing missing now is a button. So here button type is submit by default actually, button primary, and we say simply save maybe button, like that. And with that, when we click this button, the handle submit function will be called. And down here now we have to decide, do we want to update a game or edit a game or add a game? So what we do again is we check for the ID. If it's not null, this means that we are going to update the game here. So we call await and then HTTP put as JSON async, and this is now the API video games controller, again with the ID, and we have a payload now, which is, well, the game. So that's that. Now we can also put that to or into the results, and then we just say game is a result content, and then read from JSON, almost JSON async is the one, video game. All right. And in the other case, when we add the await keyword here, in the other case, I know it could be null, but I don't care for now. We say var result is await HTTP post as JSON async, pretty much the same URL and payload, just not the ID here. So like that. And again, we just set the game like that. Okay, let's try that. So we restart the application. There we are. We can edit Cyberpunk, for instance. Let's just say the release year is different for whatever reason. And we go back and we see really it's different now. It's 2021. Or actually, game has been completed just a couple of days ago with the update 2.1. So actually, let's just say the final release was 2023. We save that and we see 2023 here, and as well here in the database we also see the change. Great. And of course we can add another game, like for instance The Witcher 3, also see project 2K15. We save this, go to video games, and there is our game. Now the last step is deleting. So it's up to you how you want to do it. We can do it here in the form, or we go back to the video game overview and add another column here. And here now we again add a button. This time it's a dangerous button. We say delete game. All right. And here now we say task delete or async task delete game with the ID, and we already have our HTTP client here, so we say await HTTP delete async, not from JSON, just delete async, and then API video games, and then the ID. And after that, let's just reload the game. So let's create another method. Async task load games, and we simply put that there. And here we call await load games, and same thing here. Oh wait, load games. Okay, last test. We have our delete button almost. I forgot to change the text. There we are. We can delete a picture and we're done. So here now, reload, and the game is gone. That's it. I hope you learned something and liked this tutorial. Sorry for the mistakes. Again, it's late and I have to go to bed because my kids are keeping me awake every single night. Anyways, this is another topic, so I hope you learned something. If so, please guys, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel. It really helps creating more videos like that. And thank you so much to all my patrons for supporting me. I love every single one of you, and if you want to support me too, check out the link in the video description. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I see you next time. Take care.